Recently, Dean from Blog for the Blood God and captain of Team Australia for Warhammer 40k reached out and asked if I would paint a Space Marine in the team colours so they could raffle it off and try and help raise some funds to cover a whole team of nerds going overseas. And just as if somebody had asked me if I wanted seconds or dessert, I said yes. Since this is all about spreading the Aussie spirit, I roped in a few of my international mini painting mates. Guy from Midwinter Minis, Phil the Glacial Geek, and Sam Lenz, to see if they could guess some of the Aussie slang. But first, we're going to get some colours on this Space Marine. If you didn't know, whenever a team represents Australia internationally, our team colours are always green and gold, and when we say gold, we really mean yellow. And then Team Australia put out a post asking their supporters what kind of scheme it should be, and all of those flaming galahs ended up with a quarted scheme. Which means this was going to be really rough with an airbrush. But luckily, in the month leading up to this, we actually put out a video covering an interesting green and a Miami hotline yellow. So if you like either of these two schemes and you want a little bit more detail, go and check those videos out. Because we're going to be following the exact same steps. In those videos, you will also find diagrams that kind of explain light placement just a little bit easier. But for now, we've built up a wet blend between Angel Green and Terrestrial Titan before moving into Green Skin. All of the blends and transitions that you're going to see in this video is a mix of wet blending, feathering, and a little bit of glazing. But before we get too deep, let's see if those international mates of mine can tell us what Arvo means.
Arvo. Oh no. Avocado.
Arvo. Is that some kind of animal?
I assume that this is much like Argo. It's when Ben Affleck pretends to be someone he's not and does a secret mission in your country. So that's what I assume it means by Arvo in Australia. So maybe when Ben Affleck, or to go a bit differently, maybe just Matt Damon goes into your country and does something weird.
Arvo means afternoon, no Affleck.
Oh, that's close.
Fucking what? Okay, Avo afternoon.
What? That's not true. Definitely has to do something with Matt Damon or, you know, or Ben Affleck.
Now, I don't know if you guys have tried this before, but I find painting miniatures for other people pretty stressful. And one of the big reasons that I don't do commission painting anymore. But at least with commissions, you kind of get the idea of what style and what feel they like, but doing something like this for a raffle, where you don't know where it's going to go, that's a bit challenging. Since both of these color schemes have a full paint guide video out already for them, we're going to talk a little bit about the application itself. Greens, pinks, orange and yellows are going to be some of the biggest colors that we find in this miniature. And they're also colors that are generally known for not having fantastic coverage. I do have a step up here because I am using the Army Painter Fanatic range, which has a lot better coverage than usual, but you still have to be mindful of the application itself. Whenever you're working with a specific paint or a specific color that you know isn't going to cover well, don't try and cover it in one pass. What you want to be looking for here is a smooth application. Full opacity here is going to be a little bit of a struggle, so don't shoot for it firsthand. You want to lay down those thin, smooth layers and slowly build up to that full opacity. And be patient with it. That's something I struggle with a lot, is patience. And that's actually something you can see in a few videos where I've created a texture on the surface because I haven't waited the entire time for it to dry, or I've put the paint on a little bit too heavy. A lot of people talk about speed when it comes to painting, but speed really isn't the goal here. There is something to be said about efficiency, but that doesn't mean we have to cut corners to get to that end result. Painting miniatures can take a while. And honestly, that's the enjoyable part. Don't try and rush through the fun just so we can roll dice and feel bad about ourselves. Which may be more of a me thing because I tend to roll a lot of ones. And if you relate to that, you probably feel a little bit sick. Chunda.
Vom.
Chunda. Is that when you have some kind of diarrhea in your stomach from eating fish? Some kind of chum thunder.
I do know this one. That is to throw up. So to puke, to purge your stomach. Chunder.
With an entire green leg, now we should probably move over to the other side. And there is a method to my madness here. For me personally, I find I get better results if I focus on one section at a time. Thanks to the other videos, we already have our recipes planned out, and we already know that we're going to be doing a quartered segment scheme. But I don't want to jump ahead and do every single part that's supposed to be all of those colors at once because it may not work out for me. And what I mean by that is we're doing a quarter scheme between a green and a yellow. They're pretty close, but they also can clash a little bit. Yellow can get extremely hot and vibrant. And something that I don't want to do is have all the green painted in and then go in with the yellow only to find out that the yellow is way too much and the green needs a little something extra. But also zeroing in on a single section at a time can help us focus on something like light placement, which as miniature painters, that is our entire job. Trying to scale down and recreate the natural effects of light and what happens when it's bouncing off different materials. And while arguments can be made against that concerning different styles, that is still theoretically right down at the base what we're trying to do. Even the absolute vivid fever dreams of paint schemes that I come up with on the channel is just replicating light, just replacing colors. And here's another colorful word, Thunderbox.
Fart? Bumhole.
So close.
What? Us?
Thunderbox. That's a machine that you use to listen to Akadaka.
No idea. No idea on this one. I'm gonna go maybe like a boom box. Maybe that's the Thunderbox, or like a radio. I have no idea.
Thunderbox, dunny, outhouse, and shitter. That's a toilet.
Oh, okay. Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'll do.
Thunderbox is a, well, that wasn't Australian, but toilet.
Okay. I might now have to call the toilet a Thunderbox from here on out. That's the best one.
Orange is typically a color that's fairly difficult to get to full opacity. But with something like this, that actually works to our advantage. I haven't thinned this orange down at all, and what I'm going to be doing here is coming in with the orange on top of that wicked pink base coat that we've got, and then start mixing in some wicked pink and kind of doing a wet blend. Pink and orange together make one of the coolest colors that I've ever come across because it is such a hot, intense color. And they blend together extremely well. But because orange can be so difficult to get that opacity, it means we're going to have to go over it a few times. And when we're doing something like wet blending, which is a technique that you usually do a couple of times to get everything right, that works out. Don't be scared of wet blending. Wet blending is something that we all do a lot and you just don't know it yet. The most scaled down explanation of wet blending is literally just mixing paints together. We did that in kindergarten, we've been doing it on the palette when we're making our own colors. The only difference here is we're looking for a gradient and we're doing it on a model. After we follow through with the orange, we're then going to jump into Moonbeam Yellow. And that's a paint that you're going to find in the Army Planer John Blanche Masterclass set. And it's got such a vivid punch to it that it's actually become my favorite yellow. But because it is a yellow, we still have those same properties as the orange, so we're going to treat it in the exact same way. Laying down that first initial coat, and while it's still wet, we're going to come back with that little bit of orange and just wet blend it back. And we're going to be doing that a couple of times. Something that is very rarely mentioned in mini painting and paint guide videos is all these steps are very rarely one and done. You'll see some of these blends and transitions kind of move across a little bit as we go, and that's because I'm going back and forward between all three paints to kind of adjust everything to make sure it's sitting in the right spot and smooth, and it is perfectly fine to go back and redo some work. It's actually encouraged. I also encourage budgie smugglers.
The pants, white fronts. Yeah, easy.
Budgie smugglers. I know a budgie means parakeet. So, like, bird. What? Budgie smugglers. The budgie has to be part of the human body. Smuggling it. Is it like a bra? That's not right. Budgie smugglers.
I do know this one. In the US, we call that a banana hammock. It is a Speedo, a small bathing suit on a man that accentuates the lower parts of a gentleman.
Out here, we also call them dick stickers.
Men's bathing suit. I thought it was something to do with the package.
Now here's where things start to get interesting because we've got a yellow and a green and all our sides are set. So now we need to work on that quarter scheme. And after seeing the yellow recipe sitting against that green, I'm pretty happy with how they're working together. Building up the highlights in the green to electric line, which is an incredibly yellow green, I think that's kind of what sold it. One thing I see a lot of comments on and get a lot of questions sent to me is how do I approach different parts of armor or different shapes? And honestly, that is why I really like using Space Marines for paint guides, because everything is made up of either a cylinder, a half cylinder, a sphere, or a half sphere. And honestly, when you boil it down, just about everything else from GW is made the same way, at least from 40k. Even though we're working on an abdomen, which is a concave surface, it is essentially the same as working on a cylinder. We're dealing with that same kind of wrap that we were with the leg, so we're going to basically approach it the exact same way. And if you want to have a look at the shapes on a Space Marine, you can see how similar the arms and the legs are. You can then see how the abdomen also becomes a cylinder. You can see how the pauldrons are even a sphere on top that kind of bleed into a cylinder. So that is a little bit of a mix, but it's still the same thing. We're all working with the exact same shapes, which means we can start to use similar patterns and similar forms of shading for them. When you start to break things down into their basic shapes, it becomes a lot easier to understand how they're going to react with light. Not only that, it's going to be a lot easier to approach different models once you've figured out that all of those shapes are kind of universal. And after we've figured out the shapes, all we're really doing then is creating the separation between the plates. If you think about animations like comic books and cartoons, the outline is incredibly exaggerated. Even though they're 2D, that little bit of extra weight really defines what sections are what. And that's something we replicate in miniature painting using the physical depth of the 3D object. As I mentioned earlier in the video, don't forget to check out the links in the description for Team Australia Warhammer 40k. There'll be more information very soon about the raffle where you can win this model. Come on, it's at least worth $5.
Tell him he's dreaming.
But before then, it's going to need a base, and because it's a raffle, we're going to make it a fancy base and go with a plinth with a background. To bring the great southern land into the grimdark future of Warhammer 40k, I'm going to build up a little bit different base than I usually would, so I'm going to go with some red dirt. It kind of looks like mud. But because it's me, it's going to have a little bit more saturation. And I think we've covered it enough that I'm not much of a grimdark painter. I was pretty outside of my wheelhouse when the John Blanche Master set came out. But what I have found is that those colors have been absolutely fantastic for basing for me. Pulling out some reds and some ochres and basically just pulling out some of the saturation that I use in the model has a massive contrast with the model itself because they are so incredibly vibrant. And yes, if you spotted that little bottle, that is going to be a VB bottle at 20 to 8 in the morning. Get that up ya. They call Australia the sunburnt country, and that's probably because we live a quarter mile from the sun. So I wanted everything on the base to feel dry, hot, and cracked. The other thing I wanted to do was push some of the focus towards the miniature itself in the entire composition, which is why I'm pushing the saturation a little bit more towards the sides, so straight down Main Street just kind of builds this pathway of light. Alright fellas, let's do another one. Tracky Dax.
Tracksuit bottoms.
Trekkie decks. These double ones are even more confusing. Trekkie decks. Is that like trail snacks? Like a granola bar?
I feel like you just made this one up to throw me off. That's what I'm going to go with. That's the one to throw me off here that I'm not supposed to have an answer to, and it's supposed to make me look like a fool. Or maybe it's just the easiest one. I'm being made to look like a fool all on my own.
Guy got it? They're sweatpants.
Tracky decks. Sweatpants!
Oh, okay, I get that one. I still think you made it up.
If you've never seen pictures of the Australian desert at dusk or dawn, I highly recommend you go and check some out. It can be some absolutely wild interaction of colours. Which is why I've gone for somewhat of a desaturated purpley blue here. And instead of just having a flat blue sky like we get so often out here, I did want to put in some extra visual interest and go with some clouds. But to keep that feeling of interest, instead of a white, we went with a cultist purple, which is more of a lilac. Before mixing in some blue sapphire and some white just to get a really cold, pale off-white. And to start finishing up the base, I'm going to do something I really like doing at the moment, and that's creating a vignette. For me personally, I find that putting in something dark like Turnbull Turquoise really kind of pulls out a little bit more depth and starts to frame the whole thing. Before we see how the finished model ended up, make sure you hit like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And keep an eye on all of those links in the description if you want to own this model. And now it's time for the grand reveal. Warlord Titan! Nah, just old mate. A massive thank you to everybody who was involved. Dean from Blog from the Blood God and Team Australia Warhammer 40k, Guy from Midwinter Minis, Phil the Glacial Geek, and Sam motherfucking Lens. And as always, thank you to the Army Painter, in-games, and all of you amazing Patreons and viewers that keep this going. Hooroo.